Real men are masculine men. They're reliable. They're courageous. They're confident. They're competent. They have emotional discipline. But boy, they know how to be a warrior, and they certainly know how to be a gardener. And we are raising generations now of young men who are being taught to be feminized by the school system, by music, by media, by television, by their parents, because no one wants to rock the boat. And these young men have this desire to be rough and tumble, have this desire to acquire, like, I want to grow a company. I want to acquire nice things, a nice house, nice cars, nice watches. But all that seems to be called toxic these days.
Remember, adversity is your advantage.
My dude B, welcome back.
Good to be back, Brycey. Another awesome episode. Let's rock.
All right, so we're going to talk about the sad state of affairs for our youth, and specifically young men. And I want to kick it off, just curious from your perspective, B, why young men are struggling with anxiety and depression. And I mean, there's a lot of reasons for that, but I want to unpack that a bit.
Yeah, well, it's like a multi-pronged, multi-layer thing, right? The reason young men today, when we say young men, let's kind of label it, say, 12 to 17, 18, 19 years old, especially as they enter that puberty stage. And the reason they're really struggling with anxiety, depression, lack of direction, purpose, is multi-pronged. Number one, fathers are more absent than ever before.
Lack of father.
Right?
Yeah.
Not only by way of divorce rate, because there's a, 54% divorce rate these days, right? Not only by way of divorce rate, but also by way of the other 50% or the 47, 48% that are around. The absence in terms of actually fathering, parenting, mentoring, teaching, being an example, it's not there anymore because dads are lost in their iPhones and social media and drinking and trying to work and I get it. I have so much respect for the dads who are out there trying to get food on the table. I get that. But one of the greatest responsibilities we have is the responsibility of raising great sons and daughters who will one day become someone's mom and dad themselves, right? They will one day shepherd, hopefully, our country, our communities. And you know, you buy a car comes with an owner's manual, when to change the oil and when to take it in for routine maintenance. If you're hearing a clunk, this is what might be happening. We're not born with an owner's manual. So as a young man gets into puberty, you know, mom and dad just feel like, well, as long as I provide food and shelter, you're good. Well, I always have to remind parents that, you know, if you think that your job is to provide food and shelter, the government can do that. So the government can parent. If that is your definition of parenting your kids, well, I need to provide a place for them, a safe place for them to live, and food. Government can do that. You know, Section 8 housing, because I started off in Section 8 housing when I came to the United States. So the government can provide housing, foster homes, Section 8 housing, and they can certainly provide food stamps and food. Might be the lowest quality food, but they can provide that. What a parent does, what a dad does specifically, because moms turn babies into boys, but dads turn boys into men. What the dad does is he must lead himself in his life to become an example to his son of what a confident, competent, capable man is. A man who seeks to develop purpose, a man who can be a gentleman, a man who can be a servant to humanity, and a savage when necessary to fight and protect and defend. And with the absence of all of that, of proper fatherhood, and with the media, here's the next layer, with the media now over the last 15 or 20 years, but we've seen it accelerated in the last 5 years.
Yeah.
It started probably 15, 20 years ago, but the last 5 years really accelerated this whole toxic masculinity movement. And it's a movement. Remember, back in 2017, 18, there was the Me Too movement, right? Where, and rightfully so, like Bill Cosby and Harvey Weinstein and all these other creeps who were taking advantage of women and drugging them and doing horrible things to them. There was that Me Too movement. There's always movements taking place. Some movements are righteous. Other movements are designed with an agenda.
Or do you think, when to your point, righteous, sometimes I think, yeah, they start righteous and there's good intention, but then they just get taken way too far in the extreme.
We've seen that happen. In fact, if I don't know if you watched the Joe Rogan and Mark Zuckerberg interview that just dropped a couple days ago.
Yeah.
Right? Zuckerberg, who's now doing jujitsu.
Like a new man.
A new man. He's doing MMA, jujitsu, and he talks about how masculinity is needed and how he regrets ever complying and colluding with the government. And he realized that all those fact checkers' intention was good. You and I say this all the time. The path to hell is paved with good intentions. He said the fact checkers, the intentions were good, but those individual fact checkers soon started to kind of impose their own personal ideology on Bryce's post, on my post. And before you know it, they're like, well, I don't agree with capitalism, Bryce. I don't agree with free speech to the point where it could be hate speech. Well, how do you define hate speech? I mean, I hate to say it, but Hitler's speech should be protected. It's bad. We shouldn't abide by it, but we should know about it.
Amen.
Like if I put up clips of Hitler speaking and going, look how influential this man was and how influence can be used for evil. Let's make sure that this type of influence is never, ever tolerated. If that is blocked, we don't know history. And if we don't know history, we're liable to repeat it.
Amen.
Right? And so with that said, I think maybe there was good intention or maybe there wasn't. I don't know. But as legacy media and then Hollywood, TV, social media began to call it toxic masculinity, young men began to start leaning towards feminizing themselves because the school system started to do that. Churches started to lead them into that, decrying and defanging young men. Young men need to be rough and tumble. Young men need to want to test themselves against another young man, right? Another young man.
Just look at like little boys play compared
Yes.
to girls. So they're just running around, getting dirty, banging around. I mean, that's how men are designed.
Yeah. And then when you have sitcoms that show men as, dumb, dopey, ditzy guys who need to be told what to do by their wives, otherwise they're lost and confused and can't even tie their shoes. As a young man watching that, you go, I guess that's how I'm supposed to be. I guess I'm supposed to treat my wife like she's my mom. And if a man treats his wife like she's his mom, then she will treat him like he's her boy. Mm-hmm. And now when that man's son sees that, he says, oh, maybe this is how it's supposed to be. Mom wears the pants in the family. And then, of course, you ask mom, they go, man, I wish men were men again. Well, they were, but they got declawed, defanged. You now treat him like a boy, but he now wants to be treated like a boy because he thinks that maybe I don't want to be called toxic. I don't want to be called toxic, but I realize there is no such thing as toxic. The only toxic men there are men who don't have masculinity because they are the most dangerous men. They're backstabbers, they're liars, they're emotionally reckless. Real men are masculine men. They're reliable. They're courageous, they're confident, they're competent, they have emotional discipline, but boy, they know how to be a warrior and they certainly know how to be a gardener, right? But if you're all gardener and then you find yourself in war, you're fucked. And we are raising generations now of young men who are being taught to be feminized by the school system, by music, by media, by television, by their parents, because no one wants to rock the boat. And these young men have this desire to be rough and tumble, have this desire to acquire, like, I want to grow a company. I want to acquire nice things, a nice house, nice cars, nice watches. But all that seems to be called toxic these days. Competitiveness is being, dude, we were competing against Russia to go to the moon. Mm-hmm. That is masculinity at its greatest. Mm-hmm. Like as a country, we were being masculine. And man, look how much like leaps and bounds we made in humanity. And so young men with the absence of masculinity and the absence of being competitive and purpose-driven feel like I have no drive, I have nothing to compete for. It's wrong, it's bad, it's being called toxic. And when a young man doesn't have anything to compete against and to drive towards and lock his purpose onto, starts getting depressed and anxious and sad. And I think that's why we have so many young men doing very stupid things out there, from mass shootings to, like look at the Trump shooter, a young man. Look at the guy that went to shoot, that shot that healthcare executive, a young man.
Which is like being celebrated to some level, which is
Right.
freaking crazy
Right.
to me.
It's all gotten backwards.
Yeah.
See, because I always say this, like young girls are born with purpose. Like they instinctively know that they want to have a child, a baby, and that baby will be their sense of purpose. Mm-hmm. Men we're not born with a sense of purpose. We don't like all of a sudden like start taking care of our dolls like girls do, and like one day I'm going to have a real doll, a baby, and that's going to be my purpose for the rest of my life. And so a young man must grow up and develop his purpose.
And value, I would say, from my perspective, women naturally have value to them in the sense that
Yes.
Mother Nature, like ultimately humanity comes from a woman.
Yes.
So by default, a woman has value. A man does not have intrinsic value. The
Well
only
said.
value a man can acquire is actually through acquisition, through learning skill sets, being able to hunt and forage, and now in modern day, being able to lead, mark, and sell that sort of hunting.
And acquire, exactly.
Yeah.
Because a woman values a man who can protect her, provide for her, preside, who can be confident, courageous. And a woman by default has value. She's coveted. She's sought after by us men, right? Whereas us men, we're just disposable. We go to war. The ones that don't go to war get the spoils. And so we have to develop, like you said, those skills of mastery, of courage, of acquisition, of building ourselves, developing ourselves. And when we do, we begin to separate ourselves from the herd. And this is how men develop and build their value, their worth. But that's all been discouraged. And then we go, well, why are all these young men depressed and anxious? I know what we should do. We should put them on more antidepressants. And then we continue to throw more gasoline on the fire.
And in some way, it almost feels like the pharmaceutical companies and all that, they want that. They want our, youth and young boys not to be active and eat well and,
Sure.
Ultimately be the best version of themselves. So that way they're dependent on the system. They're dependent on medication, this, that, and the other. I mean, there's a whole nother layer to that as well.
And that is another layer. Actually, you make a very good point because let's consider that the third layer. And do pharmaceutical companies want men to be docile and dopey? I don't think so. I don't think they want to emasculate men. What they figured out is the more sick you are,
Yeah.
mentally, physically, the more you're going to be dependent on their product. And they need to sell more of their product for their stock shares to go up so their shareholders can keep investing in their companies, right? And so pharmaceutical company, I don't think they have like this devious plan to emasculate men. They just go, men and women are our customers. The fatter, sicker, more mentally and emotionally disabled they are, the more likely they are to use multiple of our products, their pharmaceuticals.
Now, B, I'm curious on what the solution is. And we talked a little bit about, before I do, I want to dive in a little bit more to the Zuckerberg interview, which is freaking wild, man. Donna, Tatiana, and I were just glued to the TV, actually watched it in 2 different nights. It was just a freaking craziness. And, Zuckerberg from what he shared on the podcast, and if you haven't watched it, I highly encourage you to do so, but he had this big awakening actually through jiu-jitsu. And he talked about, he grew up in a family, he has 3 sisters, he has 3 daughters, so very feminine in nature.
Yep.
And it wasn't until unlocking jiu-jitsu is really kind of where he developed his own masculinity. And that really has come out the last few years. And just the way he shows up, the way he communicates, his level of confidence talking to Joe, I'm like, dude, very candidly, I'm very grateful for Mark Zuckerberg. I view him as a partner of ours because we're able to leverage his technology and, be able to market and, help run our businesses throughout the world. But ultimately, him going through that particular experience has opened him up. And I wasn't even, I guess the point I was trying to make is I wasn't even a huge fan of him previously.
Nor was I.
Aside from the fact of being grateful and also respect, ultimately his bill, absolutely. But now seeing his transformation and just coming out of the shell, one, I like the guy more. And then 2, just the way he shows up. I mean, forget about all the business success. Deep down, he is a better father for his wife. He's a husband to his wife. He's a better father for his children going through that process. So from your perspective, B, what are some of the solutions that young men are needing?
Well, the solutions start with both mom and dad, but I think the dad has a greater role in the solution because the 4 things that Jack Donovan says that men are in his book, Way of Men, is strength, honor, courage, and mastery, right? Strength, not just physical strength, but mental and emotional strength, like the ability to be resilient and to persevere through hardship and hard times. Physical strength as well, to be able to move things, to be able to be a formidable force against evil. Honor, to be trusted by your peers, by your fellow man. I mean, let's face it. When we see strange men walking around outside, we nod this way. When we see each other, Bryce, you and I, in the hallways, we nod this way, right? It's so instinctive for men. When you see a strange man, you instinctively, and he will instinctively nod downward in the form of protecting your neck, your vital carotid arteries.
Yeah, totally.
It's in your instincts.
Totally.
Yet when I see you behind the glass, right, in your office, and I just we make eye contact, and we go up. Hey, I'm willing to show you my arteries because I trust you.
Holy smokes.
Honor.
Yeah.
Integrity. Trust. Loyalty. Men need that. Think about caveman times. It would have to be, all of the men would have to band together, and they'd have to trust one another that we are going to have to go attack this hungry saber-toothed tiger and kill it. A couple of you are going to create a diversion. A couple of you are going to have spears and rocks and nets. And a couple of you are going to have to get chased by this goddamn saber-toothed tiger towards the spears and rocks. And collectively, we're going to see if we can get it. And if we can, the whole tribe eats, right?
And to that point, I mean, the biggest in our partnership, I always think this, the biggest value I can be to you is to continue to develop my business quotient, my mental fortitude, my ability to lead, market, and sell, because then I'm more valuable to you and our entire organization.
Bingo.
And vice versa.
Bingo. And so you make such a good point, because that goes on to the next thing, right? So we talked about strength, physical, mental, emotional strength. We talked about honor, right? Integrity, trust, loyalty, respecting another man. Well, what does Jack Donovan say is the other one? Courage. And you and I, as we faced the pandemic and we went through the pandemic together, we were able to see courage in one another. In times when I was down, you lifted me up. When you're down, I lifted you up. During that time, we start showing each other courage. Men need to see that, okay, this guy that I'm with has courage, that if the poop were to hit the fan, that he knows right from wrong, and he will have my back like I will have his back. And the fourth thing is mastery. So what are you good at, which is the thing you said. What do you have mastery over that you can contribute to the tribe? Not everyone was a hunter back in the day. Some guys were just good at making the bow and arrow, but they were horrible at going out there and hunting with it. But if I make you the bow and arrow because I've got mastery, and you're willing to go hunt with that bow and arrow because you've got courage and strength, then I'm accepted in the tribe. But if I don't have strength, I don't have honor, in other words, I'll sell you out to the other tribe as soon as you turn your back, right? Lack of honor. I don't have strength. I don't have courage. And I don't have mastery. I'm useless to you. This is how men operate. So it is the dad's job to teach a young man strength, honor, courage, and mastery in things. Mastery in fighting, mastery in communication, mastery of skills, of acquiring skills, marketing, selling, building, leading is a skill, right? And the absence of that, you're not accepted into a tribe. And this is why young men feel so alone these days. They are not taught to be strong and courageous and honorable and masterful at anything. And they realize, and I see this in the comments of the BK show all the time, when I'm like, hey, these are the high income skills you need. And they go, well, if I don't have these high income skills of copywriting, of marketing, of sales, of leadership, then what do I do? What would common sense tell you to do? Develop them, learn them. They just go, well, I guess I'm useless. Okay, so you're going to stay in your mom's spare bedroom and keep smoking weed and jacking off to porn? Or do you think that because your dad was absent, maybe you can father yourself? Maybe you can use this video here, this podcast here, this episode to start fathering yourself, right? Like, you get a second chance at parenthood when you decide that, okay, maybe my dad wasn't the right dad for me, but now that I'm older, I can consume books and podcasts and videos and start fathering myself. Like, there is no excuse for that. So where do we start? We start with the fathers. But if you're a grown-ass man and you're listening to this and you're like, dude, I'm that guy who's depressed and anxious. I don't have any skills to speak about, to add to a tribe. Like, why would any man want me in their group? Well, start developing those skills. Start fathering yourself. Start learning to communicate. Go to Toastmasters and learn to communicate. Buy Charisma on Command, a great course on building charisma and study it.
Get in the gym, start working
out, do jujitsu, MMA, go join a chess club and become cerebral, right? Like take an improv class and learn humor and how to articulate. And then, gosh, go learn how to hunt. Doesn't mean you got to kill anything, but learn how to hunt with a bow, learn how to hunt with a spear, learn how to hunt with a rifle. And then you realize that, you know what, I'm a formidable force.
Yeah.
And this is why I believe Mark Zuckerberg went from being a toxic man, by the way.
Totally.
If you study the trajectory of Mark Zuckerberg, he created a multi-billion-dollar company, but he was remember I said the most toxic men are ones who are not masculine? Mm-hmm. Well, because he was not masculine, even though he was a billionaire, he was getting pushed around by the government left and right.
Totally.
Left and right. No surprise that he starts taking on MMA and jiu-jitsu, starts going to UFC fights, gets chummy with Dana White
on his
right?
board now. Hell yeah, dude.
And Dana White is on his board. And all of a sudden, what does he do? Recently, he put out that whole thing like, hey, I'm no longer colluding with the government. I'm not going to let the FBI push us around.
Tells the government literally was harassing his freaking, Facebook, his teammates about you got to take this down in terms of the vaccine, all the X, Y, and Z. He wouldn't have had that backbone if it wasn't. Well, now he does. He's developed that.
Right. He's developed that backbone because he's developed masculinity, and masculinity is a byproduct of him. He said he goes hunting on his ranch now, right, with a bow and a rifle. He does jujitsu and MMA.
Dude, I was impressed. I was like, good for this guy, man.
He went and did a jujitsu competition. Imagine a billionaire, one of the richest men on the planet, like with the fake name. He uses like, what do you say, his first name and his middle initial, right? And then he shows up in a hat and a COVID mask. And then when it's time, imagine on the mats, all of a sudden you're like, oh my God, I'm about to jiu-jitsu roll with Mark Zuckerberg. What the hell, right?
Yeah.
But because of that, when you are humbled by another man over and over again, when they're choking you out and they're dismembering your joints and you're doing the same to them, you realize, right, I'm a formidable force. And these men on the mats, you realize how kind they are, yet how savage they can be. And this is why we talk about savage and servants, right? Those are the same men that'll be out there like, bro, your car battery died. They won't leave that gym parking lot until you are safe. You're ready to leave. But on the mats, they'll choke you out because that's what a friend does to a friend.
And dude, so counterintuitive because Rogan's just like, you think like, the guys that are more equipped, they're going to be jerks and assholes. It's the opposites. Mm-hmm. They are kind. They will look out for you. They'll go the extra mile. Yeah. But if you get out of line, they're gonna lay it down. But you can just sense like the air of confidence in that. And that really just builds someone up so much and a guy that I want to be around. So watching that show, just seeing Mark in real time, I had the exact same perspective as you did.
Yeah, he's an example
for him, man.
Even though he did it as an adult man, he's an example of what I don't want to call him weak. I'll call him maybe emotionally weak man because it takes a lot of formidable effort to build a big company like that. You and I know that.
Cool.
However, as he said, building a big company happens over a long period of time, right? It's chronic stress. Acute stress is jujitsu, one wrong move, or MMA, right? One wrong move, and now the other guy's got you in a submission hold, right? Mm-hmm. And it took a lot of time for him to go from being a soft, weak man who was being pushed around by the government, the FBI calling them, he said, berating them, cussing at them, telling them, take down the Hunter Biden videos.
Crazy, man. Like all the freaking, like the conspiracies are freaking right, man.
Yeah,
Holy
there were
shit.
No conspiracies. They were right. They were right. All the fact checkers that he even admitted were wrong, right?
Crazy.
And so it's so cool to see that how, as he developed masculinity, he developed a backbone and courage and decided, you know what? I am going to stand up against the government. I've developed a platform to give everybody a voice, no matter what that voice is. And I don't think one fact checker or one government official that's got a deviant plan or agenda should be able to get me to take things down. And I applaud him for that. And this is what dads need to do for their young men, because a young man doesn't have the money like a Zuckerberg does, or the free ability to just go, okay, I'm going to learn jujitsu now or whatever. Now, if you're a young man, you're 19, 20, 21, in your 20s and 30s, and you're like, man, I need to do something, do all these things that we talked about. Mm-hmm. But if you're a dad and you've got a young man and he's suffering in silence and he's struggling through life and he's got no motivation, he's just hanging out in his room playing video games, depressed and anxious, and you're like worried for your kid, start taking him on the mats. Start teaching him how to change the oil on a car. Well, I don't know how to change the oil on my car. Go and watch a YouTube video and you'll learn and do it to, son, I don't know how to change the oil, but this YouTube video says we need a jack, we need 5 quarts of 10W30, we need a filter, we need a wrench.
We're going to figure it out.
We're going to figure it out.
So let me ask this question, playing the devil's advocate, because there's someone out there being, okay, I want to do this, but you know what? I have so much on my plate. I'm so overwhelmed. From your perspective, one of the things I admire about you so much, B, is just the man you are, the leader you are, the father you are to your 2 beautiful kids. You've built giant corporations, giant companies while being a father, having so much responsibility, but you've clearly been able to create structure to be able to prioritize the things that you need to move the mission forward, but also prioritize, parenting your children, fathering your children, leading your children. The last kind of topic I want to talk about is just giving some tangible takeaways from your story in the midst of all the business growth, how you've still been able to do that.
Yeah. So believe it or not, all the dads out there, parents are out there who are like, well, I'm just too busy. I'm too busy. You're probably not as busy as me, who started multiple companies, multiple corporations, lots of employees, lots of team members, lots of problems to work through. But what I realized very quickly is my kids don't need a lot of my time. What they need is a lot of attention during the little time that I give them.
Dedicated time.
Boom. That's it. Right? So, no, I didn't make their breakfast. I didn't drop them off at school. I didn't do all those things. Mom did that. Di did that. What I did is when I got home, I was fully present for the couple hours that I got to spend with them before they went to bed. And then on the weekends, when I wasn't traveling for work, I was fully dedicated to taking Andrew to the gym at 5 years old. And then Chloe when she became 5 years old. And the little time I had, I was fully focused and intentional in teaching them how to fight and wrestle with me on the bed. It wasn't like we were going to jiu-jitsu or anything. I couldn't afford it back then, right? It was being intentional and being present in the small amount of windows of time that I had with them. And if it's a weekend or a short little family vacation, I made sure that I'm not just drinking and then staying asleep. I wake up early with them and play with them. And so when I had the time, I made the time. But even if I had a little bit of time, I was fully engaged and intentional. And I read books like Raising a Modern Day Knight. I read books like Man's Search for Meaning by Viktor Frankl, right? I read books like Jack Donovan's Way of Men. And because of that, I know what a young man needs. And I know that my daughter is going to look up to myself and Andrew, her older brother, in terms of who she's going to look for when she becomes older. And I want her to look for a man who's confident, capable, is charismatic, has confidence. And so I had to become that guy, and I had to raise my son as that guy. And Chloe has her target set on that guy. Like, it's the 2 little boyfriends that she's had. Both are athletes, both work out, both are little gentlemen, go and open her door and then come back around and sit on the back seat in their mom and dad's car when, whether we're taking them out on a little date or his parents. And I loved seeing that. Like, her standards were already set.
Yes.
And
Because you set them, my man.
yeah.
Hell yeah.
And then the dads of those young men set the standards for them and coached them to become formidable young men. And therefore, Chloe was attracted to him. So if you're like, man, I want my son to grow up and find a good woman, well, you better make him a good man. Because again, going back to what you said, if he doesn't show up with value, then he's going to find a unvaluable woman who doesn't bring much value to the table. Or she'll be a damsel in distress. Like, young men that don't have purpose, that don't have a backbone, that don't have courage, don't have confidence, don't have a sense of path, a mission, they end up finding women and making them their purpose. And these women are typically the damsel in distresses. I tell them at the Squire program, I say, you're going to end up becoming a Captain Save-A-Ho, right? You're going to find some damaged and broken young woman, and try and save her because she comes from a divorce or alcoholic dad or whatever.
And it's a pattern that repeats. Like, they keep on attracting the same type of girls.
Exactly.
Because of that lack of structure. The last thing to really kind of hit that point home, B, and there's a business lesson, aside from the leadership lesson, about really creating dedicated time. I mean, we're both so busy. when we're here, we're locked in. But previously, you were just in meetings. I was in meetings.
Yeah.
Afterwards, we got stuff to do. But when we're here, we're dialed in. And that's the message. You can apply that to leadership. You can apply that to fatherhood.
Yeah.
You can apply that to your business. But that's how you be successful. And that's just a point from my observation that I just really wanted to hit home.
And I think what that really touches on what what Ed Milet said one time. He said, "Be where your feet are." Right? Like our feet are here right now in the studio. That's it. Your phone's not going off. My phone's not going off. We're not distracted by anything else other than this specific episode. As soon as we shift gears and you go into your next meeting, I go into my next meeting, I'm going to be right where my feet are. And when I get home tonight, I'll be right where my feet are, right? And with my kids, with my family, and I won't be thinking about work. I won't be thinking about business. I'll be thinking about my highest priority in that moment, which is my family, my kids. And so it is really important for dads and moms to figure that out. And one last thing I have to say, every young man, by the way, is looking to their dads or their older brothers. And in the absence of a dad or an older brother, they look to the older kids in the neighborhood. So this is how gangs end up infiltrating your young man's mind, right? Because if there is no dad who can teach right from wrong and morals and ethics and integrity and a code to live by, that young man ends up looking for the other older boys and then, oh, these gangbangers seem like they know what they're doing. And they start getting into trouble that way. This is how gangs are formed. And so every young man between, like, let's say between 12 and 17 years old, they want to know if, and they want to know this from their dads, do I have what it takes, is what they're asking, right? When a young kid is wrestling with his dad or punching his dad or testing his dad, they're testing to see, do I have what it takes to be a young man? Am I courageous? Am I honorable? Do I have mastery? And the best way for a dad to show that you have what it takes is, one, teach him. But two, there has to be a rite of passage. Because young girls know that they've become a woman when they have their first menstrual cycle. Mm-hmm. They start developing breasts and they have their first menstrual cycle and mom goes, honey, you are now a woman, right? You've blossomed into a woman. From a girl to a woman. There is no physical thing like that happens to a man, to a boy that says you're now a man. And so men have always traditionally, throughout generations, have had a rite of passage. And that rite of passage is the father and other men that father trusts taking that young man through an experience that is hard, that is challenging, that is taxing, and then circling up around him and saying, young man, I'm proud of you. I've seen you grow up. I'm here to be a mentor to you. I stand shoulder to shoulder with your dad to mentor you into manhood as you move forward, because today you've wanted to see a seat at the table with us men. You were there at my son Andrew's rite of passage experience when he was 13 years old.
End of 2018, I want to say.
Yeah, and the 2018, exactly. Yeah. He went through it twice, exactly. And that's important. And actually, I say he went through it twice because then when we launched the Squire program, the first Squire class, Andrew and I was not only an instructor for it, but I also went through it again with Andrew. Yeah.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Yeah, so it was 2018, and then later you went through the Squire program with a young man whose father was absent out of his life. But again, this is so important for dads to understand. You've got to coach and mentor and intentionally raise your man with honor, courage, strength, and mastery, and a code of conduct, and a life of purpose. Like, he needs to seek out and develop his purpose and build his value. And then at some point between 12 and 16, 17 years old, you've got to put him through this experience, which is why we created the Squire program. The Squire program, like, if you, dad, are the knight, your young man is the squire, and over that 12-hour period, he goes through this rite of passage experience that you guide him through, and then he becomes a formidable young man and wins a seat at the table. He leaves the kiddie table and he metaphorically sits at the table with the adult men, and then we begin to forge him into a man over the years to come. And that's such a beautiful thing. And if we had that more, we would have less anxious, depressed, lost, and confused boys, and we would have more formidable men, and masculinity would be seen exactly what it is, which is a gift from God and not toxic.
Boom! My dude, I think that's all I got for you. Anything else to bring us home?
I think the best thing to bring it home is if this episode spoke to you, if this episode spoke to your heart, whether you're a mom or a dad, I highly encourage you to look up the squireprogram.com, squireprogram.com. Bring your young man through this experience. It would be an honor to take a father and a son through that rite of passage experience and see how that father can guide that young man into his rightful role as a man.
Absolute game changer, speaking from my own personal experience. B, appreciate you, my dude.
Thank you.
My friends, I know you got value today. Like, subscribe, and drop your biggest takeaway in the comments. And remember, adversity is your advantage. We'll see you in the next episode.